And we welcome the Executive Vice President of Venezuela, Delcy Rodríguez, here with us in the studio. Caracas, Venezuela. It's a pleasure to have you, Delcy.
Thank you for having us.
What is the message and what could be summarized for the workers and for the Venezuelans who listened to the President yesterday in a 6-hour speech and who have, of course, the salary and the economic income as the main focus of their concerns?
Look, I do not hesitate to say that the message to the nation given yesterday by President Nicolás Maduro was an extraordinary message because, as he explained, we are coming from a turning point year, the year 2023, between a previous year in which we were recovering economically after the pandemic, in the framework of the most terrible criminal blockade that our republic has ever experienced. Never before had we known what an economic, financial, and commercial blockade was. And in that framework, our nation has been rising its head, and the year 2023 was undoubtedly a year of progress in economic development, a progress in political and social stability of Venezuela. And I believe that one of the fundamental pillars has been the national union, the spaces that were provided to express the national unity. And from that national unity, which we witnessed in the overwhelming rejection of the people against the criminal sanctions that we also saw, in this national union expressed in the defense of the historical rights of our nation over our eastern Guayana, and over this national union, President Maduro stands before the country. He speaks to the country with respect, with reality, with support, with basis. He speaks with hope that means that for the future, and from there he launches for the next 7 years some lines of transportation, the 7 lines of transformation. But one of the important announcements made by the president has to do with the income of workers, because the first victims of this criminal blockades have been for our workers. All Venezuelan workers. When the hardest asphyxiation took place, when they removed, restricted, and suppressed 99% of the foreign currency income of this country, this meant leaving Venezuela with nothing, absolutely nothing. A country that had an annual income of $65 billion, $56 billion. I remember we reached the year 2020 with a $740 million, and the year that passed was a year of progress, but as the president has said, we still have a long way to go. But what we have achieved has been with our own effort within the framework of the blockade, because we have to say it in this way: the sanctions persist, the blockade of our financial resources persists. More than $22 billion, which include the 32 tons of gold that are confiscated in the Bank of the United Kingdom. This reality persists and has not changed. But within the framework of this reality, the people have been able to assume a position not of tears or defeat, but a position where each one has added his or her sacrifice, where each one has added his commitment, his or her commitment with the country. And in the area of the remuneration of the income for workers, which was where the social wound hit the most, especially within the most vulnerable ones. Well, last year, as the president said, we came out with a bold formula. The president presented it to the workers of our country, and he said, we are going with a process of indexation, which means that the increase given to the workers and the income does not lose value. That the $70 that the president approved last year, 40 for the basket ticket and 30 for the economic war bonus, would be maintained in the course of the year 2023, and this was also accompanied by an inflation control policy where we sought to reduce inflation and that the citizens would not have to face the situation of going to a market and the prices would change permanently. And this policy was accompanied by an exchange stability. Some really important numbers. Last year was the most stable year for the increase of the dollar. If we compare it since the creation of the exchange market in 2019, you will realize that the variation in that year was 7,188%, and last year it was 205%.
A straight line that speaks of stability.
And that stability also translates into price stability. And always, yesterday the president showed it is important to compare because while in Venezuela, while the working class president, President Nicolás Maduro, is always looking for ways to protect and support the workers, to support his class because he does not come from the oligarchies. Maduro has worked all his life. He is not like Aprile, who lives with silk bath in his hands because he has not worked all his life. We should survey the Venezuelan people if they know where Caprile has worked, because it is one of the most frightening mysteries of science we have. Where has Caprile worked? When has he ever worked? The president is different. He is a working class president who comes from the working class. And that is the importance, that the workers know who is in Miraflores is a worker, because from that anguish that the workers live is the anguish that has accompanied the president in these terrible years of economic war.
You mentioned the most vulnerable sectors, and that is where I've referred to, because it covers this income that is to be increased in general for workers in 2024 to sectors such as retirees, for example. Vice President?
I'm going to that. First, I was explaining 2023 as a formula. You know, it's a bold formula. In the middle of economic war, we live in an economic genocide because what they have dropped on Venezuela is not just anything in the Venezuelan economy. They have dropped bombs and bombs, and we have demonstrated it with numbers, even in the public services, how the vital infrastructure of Venezuela has been impacted is compared to the bombs that fell on Germany during the Second World War, even superior to the number of bombs that have fallen on the city. Explosives that were dropped in the Second World War, a really shocking thing. That is why we have no doubt that this is an economic genocide and it's affected the most vulnerable. And the president has always sought this formula that has worked because the end of the year arrived, November arrived, December arrived, and the worker had this bonus in his pocket. The worker had his economic war bonus in the pocket, adding to another income that in total gives a fairly comprehensive income, and they had fixed money that was not losing value, neither impacted by inflation nor impacted by the exchange rate in formula. So this formula that he announced yesterday, the president said we are going to maintain it and informed that as of February 1st, we were going to increase it up to $40 and $60 for the economic war bonus. A very important increase considering that it is indexed. We are maintaining the formula, which we are permanently monitoring, because what is in our interest? That when the worker is going to acquire goods and services, that money he has as a product of his work, of his effort, is not lost and has the value to acquire goods and services. And he took it to an amount like I was listening yesterday to one of the interviews on BTV, one of the people in the square saying, he said, we know Maduro is making a great effort, because the blockade is still maintained as sanctions. Venezuela's income in foreign currency liquid, well, the doors to the international financial markets are closed, our financial resources are blocked, our gold is blocked, the special drawing rights in the International Monetary Fund are blocked, and what we have had to give to the workers has been with Venezuela's own effort, public sector, private sector, national union, national unity. We have had to put divergencies of all kinds and express ourselves in order to come out successful, victorious, and follow this path that the president has called us, well, to go towards the Venezuelan power. Now this income, the income of the Venezuelan power, the income of the minimum index integral income for workers, no worker will receive less than $100, the equivalent of $100. The minimum index income for retirees is now $70 because it represents 70% of the minimum index income. And for pensioners, who are already more than 5,500,000 pensioners, Venezuela has, and it must be said, absolutely financed the people by the Venezuelan income, by the Venezuelan state. Because in some way the blockade disturbed the economic blockade, disturbed the labor relations. Now those pensioners are already going to reach equivalent $25, and together with policies, bonuses, social protection of homeland, they will exceed $30. So we don't want to be like Milei and say, well, see how you can manage this. See how you manage. You have to stop your car and go and see how you manage. We are going to raise transportation fee, go and see how you manage. So there is where you really see, well, what a worker class president is. Concerned about the workers of the country, concerned about the most vulnerable in the country. Because before the blockade, the Bolivarian socialism model had been internationally recognized by the United Nations system in the achievement of the Millennium Goals. Recognition in its food policies, recognition in one of the highest human development indexes. The model works, and they attacked it with the economic war.
Above all, something you already mentioned, to unite within this model the public and private sectors on behalf of its friend states, with an economic policy governed precisely from that state to be able to integrate everyone.
We have not renounced the state. The Venezuelan government has a presence in the vital affairs of the republic, as it should be, always seeking balance, seeking to add growth and development with equality. That is what it's about, not leaving citizens at the mercy of the financial speculation. It's not about leaving people more vulnerable. It's not about leaving homeless mothers without the right to count on the state, with no one. In the month of October 2023, the president launched the Great Venezuela Women Mission, precisely to attend to the needs, because we know that the economic blockade has caused wounds, social wounds. But there is a state reinventing itself. What country, and the president said it yesterday, what country distributes 130 million food combos in a year and takes them to the people's homes?
And going from 86% import for this combo, for this basic food basket, to 97% domestic production.
That is right, of self-sufficiency, of food sovereignty, of food security, which was always a concern of Commander Chavez. Yesterday, the president told him, Commander Chavez, we are complying. Commander Chavez, your anguish, as the liberator said, my anguish will live in the future, and we will solve that anguish in the future. And that is what we'll see later, after 7 years, the 7 transformations, in the 7 years, the future of Venezuela. But without a doubt, we can say that the year 2023 was a year of progress, of difficulties. It wasn't easy, because the greatest difficulty was to recover, to rebuild from the ashes our social model of social justice, equity, and social equality.
One can speak of a Venezuelan model just as one can speak of a Chinese economic model as well.
Yes, we have our model. As the Chinese say, socialism with Chinese peculiarities. Chavez called the socialism of the 21st century our socialism. We have our model. We have our model, which historically contrasts with Monroeism in all its edges, because it helps the most vulnerable. We must be there, and that is the call we are doing to all authorities, to Venezuelan state, locals, regionals, nationals, to be there in the catacombs of the people, sharing their anguish, solving them, because we know that the blockade, look, when you study the blockade in numbers, no country has endured what Venezuela has endured. And I say this with propriety from the economic point of view, because during the COVID-19 pandemic in the year 2020, 2021, the largest economies in the world crunched. and what they were suffering was what was 5% of what the government of the United States and its Western allies applied to Venezuela. Because the blockade against Venezuela was absolute. It was swift, fast, and in less than 5 years, they accumulated more than 900 unilateral coercive measures, sanctions directed to the state. Look at the political ideological concept of shrinking the state, sanctioning ministries, productive sector, the industry, the financial sector, to asphyxiate, suffocate the Venezuelan economy. And where is the Venezuelan people? Entrepreneuring, leadering, as in the year 2023, as is already projecting a closing gross domestic product growth rate of more than 5%. This year, we are committed, all sectors, the national union, the private productive sectors, the public productive sectors, the Venezuelan people, workers. We are committed to exceed 8% growth in the gross domestic product projected for year 2024. Even modest figures are being made compared to what has been projected by the International Monetary Fund, which has to do with the leadership of Venezuela compared to the South American countries. Well, the year 2024 is projected to be even better. And what does this mean, a project that is better? That every income of the Venezuelan state is going to go precisely to the vital income of workers, to the integral income of workers, calling yourself active workers. We do not forget about anyone. When we see the neoliberal packages they intend to apply, for example, in Argentina, where they eliminate the social ministries, where they take away medicines from pensioners, from retirees, you say, is it worth? It is worth following this march. It is worth following the struggle for the Venezuelan model, Bolivarian socialism. It is worth it because it is with the people, and that's the relevance of it, which yesterday President Nicolás Maduro also mentioned, of consolidating the People's Powers government.
And what's next? What's left to do? What are the 70s? We're going to talk about all of that, Vice President, after a break in this special interview with teleSUR. We're back in teleSUR with this special interview with Executive Vice President Delcy Rodríguez. We're talking about what 2023 was for Venezuela, but also about all these years in which the impact of the falling gross domestic product due to unilateral sanctions against the country was felt in the pockets of Venezuelans and also in economic production, including, of course, oil production. Let's talk about that aspect, Vice President, which is very important.
A thunderous number given yesterday by President Nicolás Maduro. Why? Because what happened with the blockade of the oil industry? Between 2015 and 2021, Venezuelans stopped producing the amount, almost by a few barrels, of 4,000 million barrels, equivalent to an average prices at the moment to $323 billion that the oil industry lost. Now, every dollar from the oil industry has a growth in other sectors of the Venezuelan economy. That is why the President calls us to diversify our oil income, not only so that we are not dependent exclusively on oil income because of what we have experienced in the blockade, but so that we can strengthen other sectors of the national economy in its 18 engines, which have ample capacities, ample virtues of development, of generating foreign currency income for the country, income in general, direct employment, indirect employment. Now, what happened with the gross domestic product? Since that blow to the heart of the Venezuelan economy, we lost $642 billion. What country? But let the economists come out. They like to talk so much, don't they? The economists of the right wing who try to disguise the neoliberal model, which is impossible to sustain in order to give and provide happiness to the people. Let them explain. Let them come out and say which country at this moment has had an external shock like the one they caused to Venezuela with the criminal blockade. What it means for an economy to lose $642 billion in all its sectors, not only in the oil sector, but also in the non-oil sector, in manufacturing, industry, trade, in all its areas, in construction. In other words, the impact that this has on the Venezuelan economy can only be explained by what has been called abroad like the Venezuelan miracle. There is not only one explanation, there's only one: national unity. The national unity. All sectors of the Venezuelan people committed. And I always pointed out before the business sectors in front of the private sector, the effort they have to make in relation to the private sectors of the region. For example, if we compare a Venezuelan businessman with a Brazilian or a Colombian one, the Venezuelan businessman does not have the same possibilities of acquiring abroad to pay for raw materials and capital goods. Why? Because there is a financial blockade against Venezuela. And is that only against President Maduro or his ministers? No, that is against the whole country. A businessman does not have the international financial channels to pay through the SWIFT, the international financial messaging, to pay and buy abroad. That is where the blockade begins. Already against the private sector, a private businessman, then we can talk about the public sector. A businessman in Colombia, a businessman in Brazil, takes his currency, pays from his account, and so from his house he paid. Our businessmen do not have that possibility, and that is why we must recognize that Venezuela, in all its national sectors, has reinvented itself. It has looked for ways, it has looked for the formula, and look at the relevance of breaking with the oil rentier model, isn't it? How the private sector participates in the national economy life, participates in the foreign exchange market with its foreign currency, participates importing capital goods, raw material to increase production. As the President pointed out, we have been, and this is the permanent dialogue we have with all sectors. As is the case with the industrial sector, we have been recovering idle capacity in the Venezuelan industries, which were completely stopped by the criminal blockade. Venezuela has been recovering that idle capacity. And there is also a great potential and great capacity to grow even more. That is why we have been accompanying this with a financing policy. The President of the Republic explained it yesterday, how we have recovered in relation to financing, in relation to the year 2022, a recovery of the 94%, great recovery. To finance what? The productive sectors, so that the productive projects of agribusiness, fishing, entrepreneurs could have a productive channeling through financing. In the case of entrepreneurship, the F for financing. The agricultural stock market was also created. The agricultural stock exchange was created, which had an important impact on the growth. And the numbers we have seen, how the GDP grew in fishing, aquaculture, agro-livestock, agro-industry sector, a very important growth, because it had been accompanied by financing policies. And the agricultural stock exchange has had a truly barbaric growth. It started with the equivalent of $39 million in 2023, and ended up in financing, to be precise, $518 million, an increase of 500%. So that's why I say Venezuela has reinvented itself. We have all reinvented ourselves, rejecting the criminal blockade against Venezuela. And through national unity, we insist on demanding that all sanctions against Venezuela must be repealed. It is a right of the Venezuelan people. It is not a gift. And those extremists of the stateless right wing, of the Venezuelan right wing, who asked for sanctions against Venezuela, who asked for a blockade against the Venezuelan people, they have to pay. There has to be justice, because they created this situation that sought to destroy our model of inclusion, a model based on the speech of our father liberator in Angostura, of social justice, social equity, of social inclusion, social equality. Well, they looked for that. Venezuela reinvented itself, and here it is, looking for a path to consolidate, and this is the path we have to follow in the year 2024. We see it with a lot of hope, for that future.
From 2024 to 2030, the 7 T's are proposed, 7 transformations for the economic process, for the political and social process of consolidation of the country. Why 7 transformations, Delcy? And these 7 years, which this process is also looking at, and what the President announced yesterday, will also be speaking of a new moment of new governments over the country. Let's talk in both keys.
There are 7 years for hope. When you analyze each of the 7 T's, as the President called them, the 7 transformations, we are going to transform Venezuela in a positive way. Venezuela in a positive way. The national identity in a positive way. Let's analyze it. The first transformation, the economic transformation, the road we have already walked. Never again shall we depend exclusively on oil income. This does not mean that we are not going to devote ourselves to the growth of the oil industry. Of course we are. Venezuela has its right. It is the first oil reserve in the world, one of the largest gas reserves in the planet. Natural resources of the largest in the world. Venezuela has the right to exploit them. But let's not return to a past where we were dependent on that, because we place ourselves in the arbitrary site. And that was going to the heart of the Venezuelan economy, that's the oil industry. Well, we have initiated a diversification process where the private sector also contributes to the economy, where the private sector are not only benefiting from oil income, but also contributing to their own capital, to develop the countryside, timber industry, to develop the pharmaceutical industry, the 18 engines economy that make Venezuela the guarantor of an immense potentiality. That is why Venezuela is a power, as stated in the plan of the homeland. And there lies the transformation, the first T, the economic transformation, consolidating this path of a diversified economy in order to diversify our exports. Last year, Venezuela became, for example, the second largest shrimp exporting countries to France. And that was done how? With national effort. The private sector accompanied by the policies integrated in an economic recovery plan. Tariff policies, tariff-free policies, in a port regime, in a regime that definitely seeks, and this is one of the laws that is pending for this year, 2024, the diversification and promotion of non-oil exports. Well, that is the way. It's one of the T's. The economic transformation. The second transformation, independence. In all areas. The President was talking yesterday about education, science, technology, political and economic independence, all areas of independence. And we see this because one of the most affected sectors, in addition to our workers, was the public services, which are services for a whole country. They have been hard hit. A part of this has been due to the technological dependence, where the water pumping systems, for example, practically one of the countries that supplies water by pumping instead of making it anti-gravitational. It is designed to depend on European and US technology. The same with the electrical system, designed to depend. And there came the electrical sabotage, the attack on utilities. And who in the world gave us support or supplied us with spare parts? Europe said no, the United States said no, and they chased that all over the planet. If we wanted to take a nut from Germany, they said no. They chased us as they did with medicines during the pandemic. So scientific, technological independence in education is fundamental. Political independence is fundamental, and it is also one of the other T's, which is political transformation. That Venezuela goes to a new spirituality, that never again shall there be political factors that call for the invasion of Venezuela, that call for the overthrow of the government elected by the people of Venezuela, that call for the assassination of authorities in the country and a blockade, and call for the suffering of our people because they said so. They said that this was collateral damage. Never again. The political transformation must meet a new spirituality of politics at the service of the national majorities, of politics inspired in values, ethics, with morals based on the respect, tolerance, harmony, and non-hatred. We have lived moments of great hatred in this country when in 2014 or 2017 there were violent guarimbas, Venezuelans were burnt alive. Well, this political transformation, which is in some ways has been taking place when definitely dethroned from the parliament in the year 2020, the most extremist, stateless, and surrenderous cell that the Venezuelan has in its entire history. It has led to a process of recovery of the political relationship, of the political factors of the society, a form of understanding. This transformation is destined to take place. What I say is that independence and political transformation are completely linked. The third transformation has to do with consolidating peace, because when we have tranquility, many times we forget the times we have gone through, and the policies of the quadrant of peace, how we can consolidate peace, citizen security, from a perspective of protocols of respect for human rights. We can see what is happening in El Salvador. We can see what is happening in Ecuador. Yesterday, the president, with humility, modesty, offered to President Noboa not to make the mistake of handing over their sovereignty and security to those who are the main causes of insecurity in the region. The DEA, for example, is a disruptive factor because it is penetrated there with the big drug cartels. Then you are going to call the U.S. Southern Command to come and solve the problem of citizen security in Ecuador. A good example of this is the Plan Colombia. What Plan Colombia has meant for Colombia. Colombia managed to reduce cocaine production, coca production. No, it increased it by billions of dollars, more than $15 billion in Plan Colombia, with the security agents of the U.S., and they became the great producer. They became the greatest producer of cocaine in the world. That is being transformed right now. What the president here did was a modest offer he made to President Noboa to say, do not make this great mistake of giving up sovereignty. And we have a very clear policies here with the peace quadrants of how we have been rescuing prisons, penitentiaries that have been taken over by criminal gangs. Many times these criminal gangs are instrumentalized against Ecuador. They are instrumentalized to destabilize countries together with drug trafficking. And here, well, the security policy is respectful of human rights, but firm in the application of security policies that allow the control of phenomena such as criminal gangs, of phenomena such as the presence of drug trafficking cartels, and how these factors combine even to threaten political independence. That is why all these T's are completely linked. Another point that has to do with this T of transformation is preserving our territorial integrity. And here the Venezuelan people on December 3rd was firm. They spoke loudly to the world that wanted to stop the consultative referendum in Venezuela. They had no choice but to say, what do the people say? And the people spoke loud and clear and said, we are never going to renounce to our legitimate historical rights of which we are the holders of the Guayana Esequiba. And there is a law on the creation of the state of the Guayana Esequiba, early approved in the first discussion in the law of the National Assembly, with a set of policies that led to the rescue, the recovery of the Guayana Esequiba, and the defense of our territorial sea and the sea that's pending to be delimited. And the resources present there, of course. Well, then there is a fourth transformation, the fourth T, which is to reinvent ourselves, to recover our model of social protection, humanist protection. Yesterday, the president spoke about the launching of a very important mission of social justice and equality. just social justice and equality. There, the Venezuelan state, the Venezuelan people will be attending to the most vulnerable, to the most attacked by the economic war and the criminal blockade. This is the way to preserve our model, by reinventing it, but never renouncing it. Not even with the worst blockade our country has ever experienced, which no other country could have withstood, have we said, let us give up, let us throw the towel, let us surrender to the arms of Milei and destroy the state. On the contrary, we are going to reinforce, we are going to reinvent ourselves precisely for the renewal of our humanist model. Then the fifth transformation is political. We are talking about a new spirituality based on values, on the Bolivarian ethic, Bolivarian morality that allows for a harmonious coexistence with all factors and political sectors in the defense of our country. Then there is the ecological transformation. We are living not even in a time of climate change, as the Secretary General of the United Nations has said. We are now entering the era of a serious climate crisis. There is a climate emergency set by the Secretary General of the UN. There is a climate emergency and we should all be concerned, and that is why Venezuela has denounced the abusive presence of these transnationals by Guyana in a sea pending delimitation due to the ecological damage being caused in the sea, of which Venezuela is the owner. It is the owner, but they are destroying it. And who are going to be harmed? The small island states of the Caribbean, our Caribbean neighbors. Here the call is for all of us to act, the international community to act, but not in a non-hypocritical way, where those who have already destroyed the planet with their expensive capitalist, environmentally predatory model, now they say, no, the responsibility is shared, let us all surrender. No, the responsibility is differentiated on the north in relation to the south, which has been harmed by the developmentalist north with the predatory model on the south. And there the plan is very clear. President Nicolás Maduro presented a plan. We went to Brazil for the Amazon Basin, for the preservation of the Amazon Basin with concrete proposals. Zero deforestation. Zero. Because many times people try to apply prices on life. Well, you can deforest 15%, you can deforest 20%. No, zero was the voice of President Maduro. Zero deforestation for us to preserve the lung of the planet, the lungs of the planet. For us to have an impact on the oceans, which are the ones that allow the exchange between oxygen and CO2 emissions. In other words, we're talking about a dimension, it's hard to say, but that already puts at risk the very preservation of human species. We are not talking about anything. We are talking about preserving human species. And, well, Venezuela's proposal in that international arena have been very clear, firm, how to move forward without trampling on the people of the South, of how to move forward with preserving the rights of nature. And the last transformation is geopolitics. Venezuela within the framework of the large homeland, its rings, Latin America, the Caribbean, South America, which is to set roots on the Bolivarian model of integration, of union of the countries. It is the only way for Latin America.
We're talking about a Venezuela that will be at the head of this continent with so much projected economic worth by 2024, and will also lead a policy of this continent in terms of what it is proposed. That's the transformations of international government planned.
Our proposal has been very clear. It is very Latin America and the Caribbean. Our proposal is that this growth is for all of us to go with our potentialities and make compensations for the great potentialities. Venezuela, which is in this continent, has and knows that Latin America and the Caribbean is the power for the world. If you study region by region, you know what it represents, not only in our region, but Venezuela for the world, for its wealth, for its reserves, but also for its conception of the world. and of life, its conception of the world and life. In a world where in this year 2024 we pray God that it's not like this, but it's a world that is going to face great challenges against peace and international stability. We are seeing it from the first days of January, what the genocide in Palestine has meant, how Zionism and its allies are trying to internationalize this conflict, and this conflict is going to affect the whole world. That is why Venezuela is not only for its wealth, for its great reserves of